More significant severe weather will be possible in the United States today, where more damaging winds, very large hail, and tornadoes will all be possibilities in the Central Plains. And then once we go into tomorrow and Sunday, that threat of severe weather will begin to shift further down to the south. In addition to this, as we go into the tail end of this upcoming week, we could be watching for our next large storm that could bring some significant severe weather to parts of the northern plains, the Midwest, and maybe even back into the Ohio Valley. So in today's forecast, we're going to break down everything that you need to know about the weather that'll be impacting the United States between now all the way through the end of this upcoming week. So let's begin with today's severe weather risk and give you an idea of what you can expect today on this Flying Fences Friday. And right now, we do actually have a large enhanced risk of severe weather across much of Nebraska and even back into northeastern Kansas and northwestern Missouri. This is where our greatest confidence is for severe weather today, and that is where we're going to be watching for the threat of very significant hail, wind, and maybe even a couple of tornadoes. Notice we also have a slight risk of severe weather, which goes anywhere from the Texas Panhandle back into Missouri. It's quite a large area in terms of the Central Plains. It pretty much almost covers all the Central Plains here for today. We also have a marginal threat of severe weather from South Dakota back into New Mexico, where there will be a chance for some isolated severe weather today. Notice we actually have a marginal threat back over in Utah, by the way. We're not really going to talk much about that, but some isolated wind or hail will really be the main concerns there. Today's threat is going to revolve a lot around wind and hail, which we'll get to in a second, but I do want to mention we do have a tornado risk for today, and it's actually been upgraded to a 5% tornado risk out of the initial supercells that develop, as storms will go from north and northwest to south and southeast, meaning storms will initiate back up here in northern Nebraska today. That's basically where the storms will begin this afternoon. These will eventually move to the south and southeast, posing all modes of severe weather, but our greatest confidence for a tornado risk right now resides in central and northern Nebraska out of any storms that can remain surface-based, meaning that there's enough moisture to keep them more closer to the ground instead of storms that are elevated, because storms that are elevated do not usually produce much of a tornado risk. Here's the wind risk for today. Notice the highest wind threat will be across southeast Nebraska and back into northwestern Kansas, and this is where we could see some storms producing damaging winds upwards of 80 miles per hour. So make sure to hatch down your trampolines today. Make sure protecting loose lawn items, all that sort of stuff. This really should not be a drill at this point in the year, as we've had lots of severe weather already in the Central Plains, but I just want to let you know, make sure you have all those precautions taken well before the storms do hit your location today. The hail risk for today is the highest across parts of Nebraska. This is where those initial discrete supercells will develop later this afternoon, and those storms will be the ones capable of hail as high as the size of an apple. So make sure that you are also protecting your vehicle. Once we go into tomorrow, we have a risk of whales across parts of the Central Plains. Not really, it looks like a whale though. We do have a large marginal threat of severe weather from Colorado back into parts of Missouri, and as well as Illinois, where more damaging winds, hail, and an isolated tornado threat will exist. Here's that tornado risk for tomorrow. Notice again a couple of little areas here for a couple of tornadoes. Overall, the risk here will be on the lower side of things, but definitely make sure that you have a tornado action plan in place just in case in those particular locations. And then the wind threat really going to be the primary concern here across the Central Plains. Now, once we go into Sunday, the severe weather threat for the time being is a much smaller area. Wouldn't be surprised if we had some sort of small marginal threat somewhere in here back over maybe in the Dixie or Ohio Valley. But the main concern will be High Plains madness season, as that area back over in Colorado, New Mexico, and Texas will have the greatest chance for some hail and wind and maybe a brief tornado threat, but nothing that's super concerning as of right now. Let's talk a little bit more about today's severe weather setup, and beginning with only the dew points. This is really the only thing I want to show you, because I mentioned earlier there might be some elevated storms, but any ones that can stay surface-based would have the best chance of producing a tornado. Now, what I mean by that is that the dew points really need to be high enough near the surface for there to be more of a tornado risk. That keeps storms more surface-based, meaning we need more buoyancy. So once we have dew points above 60, that is usually where we're gonna have the best chance to see at least some more surface-based storms. And it looks like once we get closer to 4 to 5 o'clock, right here in Nebraska is where that area of higher dew points will be, meaning less elevated storms, meaning they're closer to the surface, and these ones would have the best chance of producing a tornado threat. And you'll see this more on the future radar here in a second, but this would be the corridor where I'm expecting the greatest tornado threat initially. Now notice back over here in eastern Nebraska, we'll also probably have a couple of discrete cells over here that move from north to south, but over here the dew points are much more lower. Basically they're in the low to mid 50s in a lot of areas, meaning we don't have much buoyancy. That'll keep a lot more storms elevated in this particular area, especially with how warm it is today as well. And then once we go into the evening, dew points continue to stay up there across parts of Kansas and western Missouri, but I do think the tornado threat will start to go down after we get closer to midnight, as there'll be a lot less shear. In addition to that, we'll also have just overall not as favorable an environment, as these storms will become more linear more than likely. So here's what we're looking at in timing for today, beginning with around 2 to 3 o'clock this afternoon. Notice not much out there, just a couple of elevated showers, maybe an isolated thunderstorm by 3. The greatest concern though starts around 4, where we start to get some more of these supercells going. By 5 to 6, I think that's when we're going to start to have the best chance for severe weather here in both Nebraska and then eventually going into Kansas during the evening. But notice right around 5, we got 3 different storms that the HRRR model is showing. These 2 here will be the ones that we're watching for the greatest concern for all modes of severe weather, including the main concern as wind and hail, but maybe even an isolated tornado or 2. By 6 to 7, these continue to push south and east. If any storms go into this environment over here, they're going to probably become more elevated, meaning that storm threat will be more geared towards hail and wind. Anything that can stay in this corridor here, back over near Kearney and Grand Island, will have the best chance of producing the threat for a tornado. Once we get closer to 8, 9, 10 o'clock, these storms continue to push south and east across parts of Lincoln, Nebraska, and then eventually by 11 to 12 o'clock, most storms are done in Nebraska. Anything left over would just be elevated showers and thunderstorms with some isolated hail. Back over in Kansas for today, things will stay relatively quiet until about 9 to 10 o'clock. We could have some storms on the western half of the state with a wind threat, but overall the severe weather threat with tornadoes and very large hail remains on the lower side of things. Once we get closer to 10 to 11, storms will start to enter into the northeast side of Kansas. I think overall these will become more linear, especially if this area of storms does kind of collide with this storm activity. That'll kind of merge everything together, leading to more of a wind threat, but anything that can stay organized as a discrete cell could still produce hail. By around midnight or so tonight, those storms move across Kansas City, and eventually after that we're done with severe weather. But the main concern in Kansas City or around that area will be damaging winds, so be prepared for that threat if you're back over in Kansas City. Beyond today, the severe weather threat is going to be very variant on a lot of small scale features. When we look at the jet stream, which controls a lot of our weather patterns and large scale storms, notice as we go into next week, we're actually going to have a ridge building in the central and southern plains that should necessarily keep things dry and warm, right? Well, not necessarily, because a lot of small scale features will continue to bring showers and thunderstorms to areas in the southern plains with some shortwave troughs, and that's going to continue to lead to an active weather pattern down that direction. But what we do know is as we go into next weekend, so around June 14th to June 15th, we are likely going to start to see some large scale features enter back into the Great Plains. This will eventually lead to bigger storms and leading to more significant severe weather events overall. Now, today's event is more of a small scale feature. Once we go into next weekend, we are talking about the potential for like severe weather outbreaks or even tornado outbreaks that are a bit larger of scale. Obviously, the details there remain extremely uncertain, but it does appear as if the central, northern plains, and the Midwest would be the area to watch for as we go into next weekend. So that area definitely start to stay weather aware as we go into the middle and end of June. Now, in terms of the future radar, showers and storms will continue right across this corridor, anywhere from Kansas back into the Ohio Valley as we go into late Saturday into Sunday. Once we go into Sunday afternoon and evening, storms in the southern plains and areas like Oklahoma, Texas, even some storm activity back over in the northern plains where we could have a low-end severe weather risk on Monday. By the time we go into Tuesday, severe weather looks like if we get anything would be back over here in the central and southern plains. I'm not seeing anything super organized or super significant at this time. Once we go into Wednesday into Thursday, that weather threat starts to shift to the Gulf of Mexico and as well as back over into the Midwest where showers and thunderstorms will be possible. Again, nothing really significant pops out to me at least for right now through about Thursday. Once we go into Friday into Saturday, same thing, nothing really too big. But I think as we get closer to Saturday and Sunday of next weekend, we start to see some larger storm activity, especially back over in the northern plains. We will keep you posted with the latest as we do get closer, so make sure that you are subscribed to the channel and like the video.